Welcome back to the Progressive Pastor Podcast, where we explore the intersections of justice, faith, and the church. JT, how's it going, bud?
Kyle, you are once again dressed like a large toddler, and I appreciate that. Today, we are joined. I'm trying to intro our guests. Today, we are joined by my good friend and colleague, the Reverend Tim Powers Reed. Woo! Studio audience. Tim is a pastor in the UCC and is stationed out in Belleville, Illinois, working with a couple churches out there, but lives over here on this side of the river in St. Louis. And Tim, thank you so much for being on today. We are so glad to have you. We would just love if you could take a minute or two, kind of tell us about your background, what, your denomination, where, tell us about the churches you're working at, all that kind of good stuff. And then we'll dive into the meat and potatoes of the episode.
Great. Like you said, I am Tim Powers Reed. I am the pastor of Trinity United Church of Christ in Belleville. I'm the lead pastor there, have been there for almost 5 years. I am also the ministry assistant for St. Paul Belleville, which is a church across town, about 7 minutes. But between the two part-time jobs, I have a full-time career in ministry.
There you go.
I think that every person should clean a toilet.
Yes.
To remain humble.
Yes.
So I continue to work as a custodian for a church in South City, St. Louis, just because I started that. And when I was in my graduate school for my Master's of Divinity, and I have a hard time letting things go. So I'm still doing that as well.
Yeah.
And I am married to Shay Powers Reed, who is a wonderful manager of Picasso's Coffee House.
Shout out to
Praise God for Picasso.
There you go.
And I was sitting at home alone on Friday nights, wondering where happened to date night, because he always works weekends. And I thought, well, date night could be at Picasso. So I got a job there. Now we work at Picasso's together.
Nice.
Yeah, blessed be.
I live in Florissant with my dog Ivy, my 2 cats, and my husband, and really enjoying living in St. Louis at this time.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Shout out to Shay. We were just talking before we started recording. Before Shay moved over to Picasso's in St. Charles, he was on staff at the Lindenwood Starbucks, which is where I would go when I was teaching and stop in. And I ran into Tim and his husband at a Pride festival here in St. Louis one time, like a year later, and Shay still remembered my Starbucks order at that time.
Oh, that's so cute. I love that.
Yeah.
It's amazing what his memory can remember and what it can't.
Yeah, does he have like he can remember customers' orders a year later, but can't remember like where he put his keys the day before?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even if there's a box by the door where we put our keys in, they won't be there.
They won't be there.
No.
Yeah, that happens.
Yeah, it sounds like my wife. She likes to stick her credit card just like in her purse, like loosey-goosey. I'm like, we are pretty poor, so like maybe we don't. Maybe we keep that like in a secure location. Yeah. She blames me when she can't find it. It's the best. Love you, Elena. Can't wait to have you on the podcast.
Shout out to Elena and Shay and Ames, all the wonderful partners of the folks here. Well, Tim, before we kind of dive into the main topics, we always have some kind of an icebreaker or some kind of a little activity for us to do beforehand to kind of get us in the flow. So today we have put together a little game because we're all pastors here, right? This is the Progressive Pastor Podcast. So we thought we would pull on some of the content of another pastor that Kyle is especially a fan of, Joel Osteen.
Is that
and
hold on?
So,
pause.
No,
is that, I don't. Okay,
we're trying to maintain a tight schedule here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rapid fire some different quotations at you, and you have to tell me if they are from Osteen or Jesus. Okay, so we're just gonna go down the list, and we're just gonna see how we do. Okay, Kyle's gonna keep score for us.
I will. I'm ready.
All right, are we ready?
There's 10 questions total.
There's 10 total.
Yeah.
Okay, so here you ready?
Sure.
Feel good? All right. Number 1, don't use your energy to worry. Use your energy to believe.
Joel.
Correct.
Okay.
Here we go. Very good.
Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth.
Jesus.
Jesus, correct.
Man,
do all you can to make your dreams come true.
Joel.
Joel, correct. No one can serve 2 masters. You cannot serve God and money.
Jesus,
correct. Anyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and anyone who humbles himself will be exalted. Jesus. After listening to people gripe and complain, just smile and remember, crows can't hang with eagles.
That's a difficult one. Let me think. I'm gonna have to I'm gonna have to really rely on my theological education.
I know,
Joel.
I know. Oh, yeah, perfect. Okay. Correct. There you go. If you don't set the tone for the day, the devil will set it for you.
Joel,
there you go. If you want to be perfect, go sell all your possessions and give it to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven.
Jesus.
Oh, I thought that one would get you. That sounds like Joel.
That
sounds
like Joel. Close.
If you want to reap financial blessings, you have to sow financially.
That would be Joel.
That's Joel. And last one, give to everyone who begs from you.
Give to everyone who begs from you.
You got this.
Jesus.
That's Jesus.
There we go.
100%.
I was really worried about the last one there.
I thought
I didn't know if Joel had turned a new leaf.
I know. We can only hope.
Yes.
We can only hope.
You know, we were putting prop bets on how you would do. JT thought you'd only get 4 right.
What?
So the fact that you got 6
That
more,
is not-
very impressive.
That is not even remotely accurate. We actually went through several layers of development with this little activity. We started with Bible verse or politician. And then we went to Bible verse or Ronald Reagan.
Which, let me tell you,
that would have been a little bit difficult.
Yeah.
At times.
Every time that I would Google, bad Ronald Reagan quotes, it was just a bunch of very old conservative people like, Ronald Reagan wasn't that bad, and here's what I think about it. And this isn't the game we're trying to find.
No.
I'm not totally, I've said this before, I'm not totally sure how, but I know all of my problems I can trace back to Ronald Reagan.
1,000%.
So I was like, I'm going to find, but we ended up with Osteen and Jesus. But well done, 100%.
Very
A
well
plus, on the quiz. So that's great. So, Tim, we had talked before, and we were interested in getting your perspective on the podcast, because you come from a background of experience that neither of us can really speak to, and earlier in your life, you had spent some time incarcerated. You worked through that experience. Now you're in ministry. We were kind of interested to hear your perspective as somebody with that background, with that experience. What was that like for you? What effect did that have on your faith formation? How did you move from that place in your life into now a full-time career in ministry here in St. Louis and Illinois?
Well, it's a long story, and I don't know how long the podcast is supposed to be.
You're all good. We got all the time in the world for you.
Well, I started growing up in a very conservative fundamentalist household.
Yeah.
And with that being said, I hid my sexuality, and I went untreated for some mental illness.
Yeah.
Because in the household I grew up with, and in the area that I grew up in, mental health was not something that was really dealt with.
Yeah.
It was stigmatized very much so.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went for years being undiagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder, which led to some childhood trauma, which also led to PTSD. With that being said, I answered a calling to the ministry actually when I was 16 in the denomination that I used to be a part of, but could not fully come to terms with that calling because of my sexuality and some mental illness. So fast forward, I hid in the closet. I went through and converted to Catholicism and hid in the tradition of Catholicism, really absorbing that tradition and not necessarily absorbing the Bible, but absorbing the tradition and what they proposed or professed. That all led to a very, very bad meltdown for me in 2016, which led me to make some horrible choices, which I will agree are just horrible, horrible choices, dealing with money and finances. And with that, due to audits, I was arrested. I was incarcerated in a county jail for 9 months and then served 2 years probation. I tell all of this because it's part of my call story. It's part of who I am, and so I'm very transparent with that. But being incarcerated and having everything taken away from you.
Yeah.
You know, people make jokes. Well, I want 3 meals a day, and
right.
you know, eating the same thing for breakfast for 9 months. You would think, even with OCD, it would be like comforting because I'm a repeater with my OCD and I like things to be a certain way. Was just very destructuring.
Yeah.
I guess. A lot of times people say when you go to seminary, they destructure your embedded theology.
Right.
Mine started years before when I was incarcerated.
Yeah.
I started really looking into my theology. I started looking into what I believed, and it just didn't quite match with what I'd grown up with. And with that being said, I always think that people sometimes have God moments. Mm-hmm. And when I was really wrestling with my faith, and when I was wrestling with, should I go ahead and go into ministry? I didn't think that I could at that time.
Yeah.
I wasn't familiar with the UCC or the Progressive Christian Movement. So I thought I was just trapped. Mm-hmm. And my father, who was a minister, the most loving man I ever met, grew roses growing up.
Yeah.
So if you can imagine being incarcerated, the smell in an incarceration area is not one of roses.
Right. Yeah.
It's a bleach and body odors, pretty much just 100% of the time.
Yeah.
And I smelled roses for 3 days as I discerned whether or not I should really pursue ministry or sharing my story. Once I was released, I had 2 years of probation. I started sharing my story with different churches and church youth groups about untreated mental illness, about hitting rock bottom, and meeting God in the wilderness, so to speak, of life. And somebody said, you should really consider seminary and go into ministry. And I didn't think that I could really. And then I became familiar with Reverend Lori Schaefer, who had helped me throughout this whole situation. Thanks to her, thank God for her blessing. And I found the United Church of Christ. And the United Church of Christ, their beliefs were more along the lines of mine than what I was growing up. And so I actually drove an hour and a half from my home, where I was staying on the family farm, to Carbondale, Illinois, just to go to church and find a church that was progressive and open to who I was and who God created me to be.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. So through that transition, I mean, you referenced this transition of you were incarcerated in the county jail for 9 months, and then you had 2 years probation, and then you spent these 3 days, smelling the roses and doing some discernment work. I mean, through that time, I can't imagine that, when you're in the midst of incarceration, that there's a ton of spiritual resources for you to pull on to have that discernment time. So when you were you discerning a call into pastoral ministry in the midst of that season, or was it really on the other side that you were that you turned that corner and you're like, yeah, this is what I want to devote my life to?
During the time when I was incarcerated, I think that I probably was more discerning a call into ministry in general, and I really thought I'd be a chaplain.
Okay.
I really thought, they called me preacher when I was in jail.
Yeah.
I was there long enough that I had this identity. They would ask me questions, different things, and I was still relying on that embedded theology of very fundamentalist conservative views at that time. When I got out and when I went to seminary, what was the funny story is I actually had to get permission from the state of Illinois to attend seminary because it was out of state in St. Louis.
Okay.
My probation didn't actually end until October of my first semester.
Oh, gotcha.
And so they had to give me permission to go to seminary. And when I went to seminary, I was always adamant, I'm going to be a chaplain.
Yeah.
God had other plans,
to
say the least, because I started doing some pulpit supply.
Yeah.
A church needed a long-term pulpit supply person. I started doing that and fell into pastoral care and loved it completely. And so throughout my Master's of Divinity degree and my seminary experience, I slowly stopped saying, I'm not going to be a pastor, I'm going to be a chaplain, and then finally accepted that pastoral work is where I'm meant to be.
Yeah. So you did your MDiv at Eden.
Yes.
And now for our listeners that I don't think I mentioned this yet, Tim and I are both in the same year of the doctoral program at Eden, working together on very different topics, but we're working alongside one another. So, at least in my experience doing seminary, and Kyle never went to seminary, so he can't really relate to this, but
I don't have Princeton money, so
the government has Princeton money, and they loaned it to me. I tricked him into it. So
okay,
I'm in
cool.
the same boat, and I'm so old as a second career person that they'll never get all their money back.
They're never going to get it all back from me either. And
but Joe Biden promised that he was going to.
That's right.
Cancel all of our debt, so that means it's going to happen, right?
That's right.
Possibly,
It's got to happen in some. Yeah, because politicians always tell the truth.
They tell the truth 100% of the time.
But so when I was in there was kind of a mix of folks in my MDiv class of second career people who came along later, and those of us that came like straight out of college, and we were just going straight through. And so I have to imagine that you brought a really unique perspective, given your life experience, to interpreting the scripture and going through this kind of formative work in the midst of an MDiv. Can you speak to a little bit of, what that experience was like, being a master's student and doing this heavy lifting, this heavy theological education, but bringing into it a life experience that is probably very different than what a lot of your peers at the time had brought into it?
Well, I think that Eden did know exactly what to do with me, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I think I wasn't the only person that had ever gone through a seminary experience that had been incarcerated in the past.
Right.
But I was one of the first people that was very open and transparent about it.
Okay.
And so other students would look at me very, concerned when I would share my story or share insight from, I don't want to say the prison system, but the penal system.
Yes.
Exactly, because it was a county facility. But I think that it allowed me to be a little bit more empathetic to individuals with differing views in seminary. We're all being deconstructed. We're all looking at different ways of really engaging our embedded theology and then our formative theology as well. And I think that it allowed me to be a little bit more open to individuals who weren't necessarily of the same thought that I was, more so than someone who didn't have that experience. And I think I've written about it a little bit, about how the previously incarcerated should be in ministry, mainly from an empathetic standpoint of life experiences.
Yeah,
it's really, I haven't yet. I know that the day will come where I will be shocked. But when I was incarcerated, the person in the cell next to me passed away, and I had to watch them carry the body out. It was different things like that are just like, oh well, that happened. And here's your food through a hole in the door. Same. And so it was just a very trying experience, but it's one that was very formidable in making sure that I realized that everybody's going through something. And you never know exactly what it is. And that allowed me to be a little bit more, I think, empathetic in seminary. I think it allowed me to be a little bit more open to some of the beliefs. Now, I will tell you, and my fellow seminarians will tell you, I was a very stubborn person about my beliefs as well, and held on to them for a very long time, coming from a very conservative background.
Sure.
So
so you reference this skill set that you had developed through seminary of, being empathetic to people who have a different viewpoint or don't have the same life experience. How have you brought that into your current pastoral ministry work? I mean, how has this experience helped inform and shape you into the pastor you are at a local church level as opposed to a chaplain?
I think it really helps because I pastor a purple church. And we call it a purple church because of the red and the blue politics that are involved in it.
Right.
We have individuals that are conservative. We have individuals that are liberal within the church. And I think that it's allowed me to love both of them as God's children, no matter what their beliefs are. And it's allowed me to help foster an atmosphere at Trinity where we can have different political beliefs and different beliefs, but we can still choose to worship together in kindness and in love. And I think that's part of why I fit at the church that I'm at so much.
Yeah.
That's really cool to hear. I mean, just with your background of being in a very fundamentalist conservative upbringing and being raised, you said you were in the General Baptist Church.
Yes.
And from the Southern Baptist Church, like to hear that you have, conservative members in your congregation as an openly gay man, that's just, it seems so like far out of left field, like as what is humanly possible from those worlds. And now to be in this one in a more progressive mindset, like that's just so cool to hear and like rejuvenating to know that like there can be, we can meet these people at the door still. So it's really interesting to hear that.
I really feel that my experiences have taught me to meet people where they are. Now, granted, we lost a few individuals at the church that I pastor at when I married my husband.
Sure.
Because I kept my private life pretty private as far as who I was dating and different things like that. And his name is Shay. And sometimes Shay can be mistaken as a female name.
Sure.
And so it was even announced at the church that Pastor Tim is marrying Shay, and everybody in the church is going to be invited. Some people still who aren't like Facebook friends with me or anything like that, still believe that Shay was female. And then when Shay came to church, and it came out, then we lost one family is all out of the church congregation that felt that they needed a more conservative view. I say that because there are some instances and bumps in the road. But for the most part, I mean, over 30 people from the church came to our wedding.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
In St. Louis. And even though some of them don't necessarily agree with all my theology and my social views on politics, they still decided that as a pastor and as a Jesus follower, that we are worthy enough to listen to. And with that being said, they got to know me as a person, they got to know me as a pastor, and they continue to listen. And I meet them where they are, and we just take baby steps.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Wow.
Is that, I mean, I think about my own ministry, and that Kyle may also relate to this. Not coming into this work with the same type of experience or the same type of background or the same type of relationship that you and your husband have, and I know I can feel really, it's really hard for me to meet people where they're at times, and a lot of time I'm typically not the one that's being, my existence or my relationship or my marriage is not the one up for debate in that, but I still find it difficult. I mean, can that be really emotionally and spiritually draining on you, or do you
very
find
much so?
Yeah,
very much so.
How do you manage that?
Because there are those individuals who will tell me that my marriage is a lifestyle choice.
Yeah,
and I would say, who would choose this
necessarily
in our society today? Being an openly queer person that as a Christian, you get slack or you get grievances from both sides. Necessarily we're not fully embraced in the queer community at times because we are Christian,
right?
And very adamant about our Christian faith. We're not necessarily embraced by the Christian community at times because we're openly queer.
Right.
Two men living together and married, in a church, but it can be draining, but it can also be uplifting when people see us and then decide, I'm going to reconnect with my faith.
Yeah.
Shay is the tech person at our church. He sings at times, special music. He's on the church council as well. He was elected to the church council this past year. So for the next 2 years, he'll be on the church council for helping make the decisions of the church. And I will say all of this with Trinity is not an open and affirming church in the United Church of Christ. It hasn't gone through that covenant process.
Yeah.
But even though they haven't gone through that covenant process, they're very much living into the idea that they're not only open, to the LGBTQIA community, but they're also affirming of that community as well.
Yeah.
Now, are there individuals who do not believe that gay marriage should be legal in our church? Yes, there are.
Yeah.
However, they choose to set that aside to the point where that we still worship the same Christ together. out of kindness and love. And you can love people and you can be kind even if you disagree. And I think that's what America has lost a lot lately.
Absolutely.
Is the ability to disagree without it being such a, I don't know,
like an existential issue.
Right. It's such an issue that's going to it's either all or nothing, it seems like. There's no middle road.
Yeah.
And I work in 2 purple churches.
Yeah. Then this church, our Concord, is not necessarily different than that. I mean, I think we talk a lot about social justice, and we do a weekly welcome statement at every worship service, welcoming all people, and we're very much moving that direction. But we still have people that are traveling with us week to week and day to day who are, who think differently about these things. And what we've really tried to stress, and I assume either now or over the last couple of years, Trinity Belleville has done some of this as well, is try to emphasize the difference between, we're not mandating that everybody has to believe this one certain way, but we're just adding a few more chairs to the table for people who have different views.
Yes.
And I think that's a distinction that is very often lost, kind of in this kind of what you're describing, this all or nothing, right? It's we can just add some more. We're not trying to take anybody's chairs away. We're just trying to fit a few more.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That was the biggest thing for me when I transitioned from the Southern Baptist Church to the Methodist Church. I had never heard of this idea of open table, especially when it comes to communion, is the one that we talk about the most.
Yeah.
But because in the Baptist Church, you do not take communion unless you are a, professed and baptized Christian. And then so when I came here on my first Sunday was Communion Sunday, and everybody gets to go up, whether you're 5 or 85, and open it up to anybody that's there. It blew my mind, and now I can't think of church any other way. That's what it's supposed to be. Are we not called to be the most welcoming and open community around? That's what we're supposed to be here for.
Yeah.
But what a cool policy.
Yeah. Does the UCC, do you guys have an open table for communion?
Each church in the UCC has the ability to set its own policy. So for a lot of churches, since they in the UCC came from the evangelical Reformed tradition, they will have confirmation.
Right.
And so communion will be available to children after confirmation.
Gotcha.
Right.
Other churches are open to all.
Gotcha.
It just depends on the individual church policy.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, that makes
cool.
sense.
So a lot of churches will have some sort of communion class.
Yes.
Just to make sure that this individuals understand. But for adults, it's open to all. The table is open.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I say that. Yeah, one of the things that a lot of people who become Methodist later in life or are second career Methodist pastors or something, because that's our mandate, our shall, we call it, the may versus shall. We just talked about this past Sunday, the things we may do versus the things we shall do, and the things that all Methodist churches shall do is have an open table, and that's what what a lot of people have said that has kind of pulled them into the Methodist church.
Yeah.
And I think there are a lot of individuals in the UCC that used to be Catholic, which is a very closed communion. It means different things in the Catholic Church. And I still respect, I have family members that are Catholic, and I still respect their beliefs. I just really am more in tune to an open table than it being closed.
Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense. I mean, like Kyle said, because I also grew up Catholic, and it's so now it's a 180 for me, right?
Exactly.
It was very, very closed. And then when I transitioned into Methodism in seminary, it was like this earth-shattering thing. It was a brand never experienced this before, right? And it was such a way to illustrate the open grace and mercy and love of God, right? Which I loved. And so, well, that's, thanks for sharing all that, Tim. I'm, curious, we've talked a bit about, you spent time incarcerated several years ago. You went through that. You're an openly gay man who's married. Shout out to Shay. We talk, at least at Eden, and we're talking about that a little bit more and more here at Concord in our social justice work and stuff. We're talk a lot about intersectionality and the way that different groups or different classifications of oppression can overlap over one another. And so I'm curious, and take this however you want, either as a pastor or, socially in relation to various areas of society, how do you feel like the intersections of those identities of being a formerly incarcerated, openly gay man, working in the church, living in St. Louis, there are lots of different things, and you live in Ferguson or close to Ferguson,
yes,
right, where Michael Brown was murdered. So, I mean, do you feel the weight? Do you feel the weight of all that all the time? Is that stuff that's not really top of mind to you at this point, or is it something you feel very, very fervently each day when you get up and go out into the world? You feel like you're carrying these multiple identities with you that you have to balance.
I'm carrying those, and I'm also neurodivergent, and so I'll throw that in there as well.
Yeah.
Which really actually allowed Trinity to accept me. I think was the neurodivergent area because of we're a WISE church, a welcoming, inclusive, supportive, engaged in the UCC.
Okay.
WISE acronym, and that means that they have a covenant that supports mental health.
Yeah.
And those struggling with mental health. So I did a sermon one time that said, "I'm OCD, I'm enough."
Okay.
And so they got to know me as a person before they and who's neurodivergent before they knew that I was queer.
Yeah.
And I think probably before they knew I was previously incarcerated.
Yeah.
As well. As far as day to day, it's really interesting because those things intersect, but they're also very different. I can hide as a cisgender white middle-aged man in a crowd with my privilege.
Right.
However, my privilege is stripped away completely if I'm pulled over by the police with a felony record.
Yeah.
If I apply for a job.
Yeah.
Or any background check.
Yeah.
That gets stripped away.
Yeah.
And I'm just vulnerable and raw.
Yeah.
So I can hide in a crowd that way. However, with the intersection of queerness and being married to a man, I have to worry every time I go to the grocery store.
Yeah.
In this day and age with so many anti-LGBTQIA legislation going on and so much hate rising in our country, it's very interesting to go to the store with my husband, and then we have to make sure that we're not necessarily showing too much public displays of affection and all of those things. And then being in St. Louis where marginalization is like rampant, I think, especially race-based marginalization in St. Louis is just through the roof. You hear all of these stories, and I've worked with individuals that are, have really had a hard time with their queerness, with religion. I've worked with some previously incarcerated individuals as well, and it just all seems to be, when can you express yourself and when can you not?
Yeah.
And when can you be just yourself without all of these things and all of this luggage that really, really weighs you down?
Yeah.
And it's difficult.
Yeah.
As a pastor, I don't necessarily preach about LGBT rights from the pulpit all the time.
Yeah.
I'm more of a faith formation. What does it mean to be a faith follower and a Jesus follower from the pulpit? But I'm still a queer activist. I'm still a queer poet. As well, and they've embraced, that part of me as well. But I don't think every church would.
Right.
I know they wouldn't.
Yeah.
I have, family members and friends that do not embrace me whatsoever anymore because I'm living my authentic life.
Yeah.
But living this authentic life is difficult, especially in this day and age. I think it was better a few years ago than it is now.
Yeah.
We're coming to the point with everything going on in our country that Shay and I are drawing up documents, for right to medical procedures and everything. Even though we're married, we want to have those legal documents just so that no one can oppose Shay if something were to happen to me, or vice versa. Yeah. And that's the state of the country that we're in right now.
Yeah. And that's like, everything you just described, they're just things that I've never have to worry about.
Yeah.
There are things that, and that's like the definition of privilege, right? It's like I've never had to worry about these things that you're describing, and I have to imagine, similar to the other question I asked a little bit ago, and I'll reference, you have a blog, right? pastortalk.net.
Pastortalk.net,
right?
Yes.
And you, we encourage those who are listening to go out and look at Tim's blog, because you write. You generate beautiful poetry and you write this stuff. The weight, is that where you channel the weightiness
Yes.
of all this stuff? You channel it into your writing. How did that?
Very much so.
How did that? Has that always been
No,
your outlet?
I just actually started writing last March. It's been about a year since that I've been writing.
Okay.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
And it all came. The idea came to me from my therapist of
Yeah.
all people, and dealing with OCD and PTSD. She really wanted me to have an outlet for everything that was going on in my life.
Yeah.
And she wanted me to journal, and I'm like, I don't journal.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is not.
Yeah.
I can't do something without some like reason for it.
Right. It has to have an end.
There has to be an end. Me writing just to write, I would say no, thank you.
Yeah.
But me writing basically a blog to share my story,
Yeah.
where other people might find it and find strength in it, I could do that.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did.
Yeah.
And so there are some days that I write 3 or 4 things for the blog, and then I'll go a week and not write anything. But if it's a heavy day, if it's something that I'm dealing with, or if it's something that somebody's brought to me that they're dealing with, of course I don't reference them by name, but the topic area may spark something that I've written.
Yeah, and I'm curious, maybe you could give an elevator pitch to the listeners, because this is what I had referenced earlier, that we're both working on our doctoral degree, and you're working on an area of research that is all related to modern forms of media and faith formation. And maybe you could speak a little bit about that, because I think that interest, I have to assume, intersects with your interest in writing and blogging and podcasting and that kind of. So, can you speak a little bit to the research you're working on at Eden, and how it intersects with your current ministry of what you're doing?
Sure. My doctoral ministry project is basically looking at faith formation.
Yeah.
And can spiritual and faith formation be affected by modern forms of communication and media?
Yeah.
Mainly looking at individuals who are not churched, who do not go to church, but are spiritual and really still would identify as Christian. Can their faith formation, can their spirituality be affected by the use of blogs, the use of podcasts like this one, just YouTube videos? Can we use modern forms of communication to affect our spirituality without the organized religion? Yeah. And people are like, but you're a pastor at 2 churches. I know, but I also feel like I have a congregation online that does not go to church. And that's my other congregation, because while I serve 2 churches, one is the lead pastor, one is, Christian ed and pastoral care, I do a lot of pastoral care online.
Yeah.
I've had Zoom meetings. I've done pastoral care through Facebook Messenger.
Yeah.
And video. And people I've never met before, to the point where it's crazy that, somebody says, well, I checked out your Facebook. You have a lot of friends. They made me go from a regular Facebook content to professional, because I hit like the 5,000 mark.
Right.
And they're like, do you know all those people? And I go, no, I don't necessarily know all those people. But my Facebook and my social media are more in lines with my ministry than they are personal.
Right.
And so that way I'm able to really share with that electronic congregation. And I really want to use that electronic congregation to be the context for my doctoral project, and really look at, can listening to someone's poetry or someone's, podcast really affect my faith and how it's formed.
And I have to assume, kind of bringing this back full circle, at least a lot of the people I know, and you guys probably each know people that are in a similar situation, who they have a spirituality and maybe they have a faith in Jesus, but they've been hurt by the church because they're openly gay, or because they have an experience with incarceration, or because XYZ, and the church did not embrace them. And, I think forms of, writing and listening and things that are not traditional, quote unquote, church, activities, if you want to say that, may be a way to connect with those people, right? I mean, I have to assume that your experiences there help you connect with people that are outside the traditional structure of church in a way that a lot of other people wouldn't be able to, right?
I would agree. There's actually a group forming on Facebook that I'm a part of that's Queer Christians of St. Louis.
Yeah.
And they're looking at trying out different churches that people suggest.
Yeah.
And they're a group of Christians that are queer that are looking for a home.
Yeah.
Mm.
And some of them have found it through modern media. Some of them are still looking for that human face-to-face contact as well.
Yeah.
And so the need is there.
Yeah.
Very much so. And so I want to curate and discern what information assists individuals in their faith formation and then share it with them. Whether I write it or it be this podcast, suggesting that they listen to that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love that. Because I think there was a time, like in ministry, just in general, where it was much more competitive, or like pastors were competitive over people, right? Mm-hmm. And I think the three of us sitting here, and I know our lead pastor, and most, if not all, of my clergy friends, like we just want to see people get plugged in to a place or a resource that's going to be transformational for them. Mm-hmm. And if that's not in the midst of the Progressive Pastor podcast, or it's not at Concord Trinity, like that's okay. Yeah. And I think that's really a new thought for a lot of people and a lot of clergy.
And I think it's still shifting in different sects of ministry. Like I think in this type of ministry here that we are much more affirming of that mindset. Yeah. But at least from where I was at, and in that kind of denomination and talking with colleagues that I had in that world, it's not. And they're still very numbers driven, and numbers are everything. Yeah. And people is all they care about. Yeah. And so if they can boost that is success.
Right.
And I'll put a plug in for Trinity. We've actually increased our average attendance through COVID. Yeah. Instead of it declining. Yeah. From when I started, because our focus is not about scarcity. Yeah. It's the scarcity mindset of what we're losing and what we've lost. And so many people are so just engrossed with people in the pews. We need more people in the pews. Right. Yeah. If we take a break from that and we really look at what blessings we have and what's in abundance for us, we lose that scarcity mindset. Mm. Yeah. And then when that scarcity mindset goes away, we lose that fight or flight, energy, and we can actually grow in Christ and, follow Christ's teachings a little bit easier. And faith formation is so much easier when you're not so worried about everything that you're losing.
Right. Yeah.
And it's really assisted us in getting people to come to church, and then they're bringing friends. Yeah.
Not to pull the Bible into this. Uh-oh. I know. Well, it makes me think of that, the parable of the generous sower, right? Mm-hmm. Who just throws. I heard a sermon one time by a Presbyterian pastor who was talking about this, and you kind of expect, like, Presbyterians, I always expect they're going to, like, talk about predestination, right? And so, like, the ground is rocky because it's supposed to be right. But this guy talked about, like, the emphasis on the sower as just being so generous and so liberal with where he's throwing the seeds that it doesn't concern him where they land. It's just that they're getting thrown everywhere that they're able to be. Yep. And I think that's really become an emphasis in a lot of our ministries, right? Is getting away from this very, very risk averse, very careful, thing, but we just want to go out and put stuff out in the world and try to connect with people in a way that, we haven't been able to, or that we haven't tried before. And if we fail, that's okay. Yep. Right. Right. At least I think we're moving in that direction.
That's the hope. Right?
I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we are running a little low on time, Tim. This has kind of flown by. It's been awesome getting to chat with you. But one question that we ask all of our guests as we get ready to close is, this idea of the work that we do in church in general is tiresome and can be heavy at times. And, you know, I know JT and I really look forward to moments like this because it kind of is like a break from the day-to-day mundane lifestyle that we have. But there's still a lot that we have to go through. And then you add in I say the pressures of being in the progressive movement of the church, kind of be on the outside. So through all of that, what keeps you coming back to ministry? Like what keeps you engaged to do the good work?
Tough question for the end.
That's why.
What keeps me coming back to the work is smiles. People that don't think that the church was for them or that they're loved. Realizing that they're God's children or the Creator's children or just part of creation. I am a huge believer of Imago Dei and that there's divinity in each of us. And when that person sees the spark of divinity within them, that's what keeps me coming back.
Wow.
Is being able to really foster the idea that not everything's broken. And that they're worthy of Christ's love.
Yeah.
That'll preach.
Yeah. Save that for Sunday. That'll go over pretty well.
We're just going to air this episode on Sunday. We're just going to, Well, Tim, thanks so much for taking time. We really appreciate you coming and sharing your story and talking with us about this, and open invite anytime you want to come back to the Progressive Pastor Podcast. We referenced Pastor Talk. Is there anywhere else they can find you, find your work that you want to mention here?
Tim Powers Reed on Facebook, but sorry, I have a stutter. It started to come out toward the end. PastorTalk.net is where they can find me the easiest. Feel free to subscribe. I'm always looking for individuals that subscribe to help with the doctoral project as well.
Absolutely.
Perfect.
Yeah, we'll be sure to plug that in the show notes.
We'll link it. We'll link the blog in the show notes.
That'll be great.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much again. Really appreciate you being here. Kyle, where can they find us?
You can find the Progressive Pastor Podcast on all social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And you can find all episodes dropping every other week on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. Some new platform opportunities may be dropping soon, so check social media for that. But once again, Tim, thanks so much for joining us this week on the Progressive Pastor Podcast. We will see you listeners next time.
See you guys.